Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Two Guys Exploring Christianity with my dear friend, Greg, not the right McBride. We were going to call him. What did we decide to do on that? Dang it! I keep forgetting. We've had several good ones. The one you came up with today was brilliant. I loved it. I don't remember.
Oh, my Gregorian calendar.
It was the calendar. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, people don't know this about me.
That's funny
because I really like steamed vegetables, and so William asked me what the date was today, and I said, well, let me look at my Gregorian calendar, and I'll see, because I keep track of the days on my calendar, so when I steam vegetables, then I can see them both at the same time.
That's funny. As I disappear off the screen for a second, count to 10, say hi, tell everybody hi real fast.
Hi real fast, everybody. How are you all doing? We'd like to welcome you to another show here on the TaNaCh Talk channel. I'm not your host, William.
You are certainly a good host, though, I tell you that. All right. I was looking at it, man, why does my hat look weird? And I was like, I got the wrong hat on. I don't like wearing that hat on my broadcast.
Oh.
There we go. That's back.
It's raining, so he's got a hat with a porch on it.
No kidding. Just called me the duck-billed platypus. All right. Okay. So here we are today. We're going to be discussing the Passover narratives and just why did I switch both of those?
Yes.
Not what I try to do. So for me, the Passover.
Actually, I guess it would be the Passover Seder narratives.
Oh. So you're going specifically on that topic.
Yeah, we're going specific.
Got it. So
it's like the Atlantic on one side and the Pacific is on the other side.
Okay. So for me, the whole leaving my previous belief systems all spun around Passover altogether. And so, in fact, that was what triggered it. And of course, there were so many other things, pretty much everything after that, confirmed.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where it all started, was with Passover. So interested to see
how
this goes.
And that's interesting because mine started with the Sabbath, with the every 7-day Sabbath. But
nice.
In Judaism, the Passover and all the feast days are also high holy days. They're also Sabbaths.
Okay, not all of them.
The 7th-day Sabbath.
They're not all high holy days. They're and not all of them are actually holy days. But like the high holy day would be like Yom Kippur, right?
Correct. Yeah,
and
that is also a Sabbath.
Right, and a lot of those. Well, actually, Yom Kippur is actually a high Sabbath, or it's like a high holy day. So, and then you have regular holy days, and then you have just the Sabbath day, which is every Saturday, which is the 7th day. Hello, people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And so
look at your calendar.
Look at your calendar. Get your facts straight. Come on now. Hey, you know. Speaking of that, though, on the whole 7th day thing, what I found was interesting. I know you know this already, but a lot of people who are tuning in the channel may not know this. But God was so brilliant in his like, speaking these things out, and you shall remember the 7th day, right, and to keep it holy. He was so brilliant that he didn't give the days of the week names. He gave them numbers. And so even today, it's Yom Rishon is Sunday. That's day 1. Yom Sheni is day 2. That's what they're actually called, day 1, day 2. So there was no way that people could mix up. Well, he said the 7th day, so should we keep the first day? That doesn't make sense. And so, and Shabbat is actually has the same root word as the number 7 also, which is really cool. So, and even in Spanish, it's sábado. So it's like it's pretty amazing. So there is no Sunday Sabbath that doesn't exist. Only in the church.
There's no what? Sorry.
Sunday Sabbath.
Oh, correct. Yeah, right. There's no such thing. Right. Our days in Western culture, our days of the week are pretty much named after pagan gods. Also. I know that Thursday is Thor's day,
right? Who
was an ancient Norse god, and I forget what the other ones were too. But they're not nice. They're not nice people that our days are named after. So
we have, which is kind of. We had a show one time because I had questions about why why some of the months in Judaism are named after pagan names too, and I was like. And they explained it. It made sense, but it was anyway. Long story short, that's a different topic for a different show.
Yeah.
And plus, I derailed you already like twice, and I apologize. Okay. And we're going to try to pack this thing up in the next. What is that?
We're having a lot of derailments.
54 minutes we've got. Oh, yeah, right. No kidding. All right, my friend, I'm going to turn it over
All
to you,
right.
and I'll interrupt you as often as I can.
Okay. Oh, I forgot to give you our compare and contrast ones today.
Go for it.
They are Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 3, and Matthew 12, 18 through 21. 18 through 21.
Matthew 12, 18
Yep.
through 21.
18 through 21.
And
And
then,
we're out of our King James Bible,
what was,
authorized version.
pardon me, and what was the Isaiah one?
42, 1 through 3.
Okay, 1 second. Isaiah 42, 1, 2, and 3. Sweet.
Yep.
I love these compare and contrast. These are
Yeah, I've got to get them all compiled for
right.
Rabbi Fedro. So,
Gotcha.
all right.
Okay, so
the
take it away, boss.
The prophet Isaiah says, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry out, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth." Now we'll do a show on the servant songs of Isaiah, beginning in chapter 41, going through chapter 53 at some point here. But I can tell you absolutely with no reservation whatsoever that the servant is the nation of Israel. That is very clear from the text. I believe we're told 14 times from Isaiah 41 through Isaiah 53. We're told that Jacob, or the children of Israel, are the servant. There is a little bit of nuance that is possible a couple of places. No such thing anywhere in the TaNaCh as a good servant and a bad servant. You'll hear that one. I'm speaking mostly of the Christians here, because if you've grown up in a Jewish synagogue, you know this. So anyway, so behold my servant. That's what Isaiah says. All right. The anonymous author of Matthew says, "Behold my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall show judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not strive nor cry, neither shall any man hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory, and in his name shall the Gentiles trust." Okay, let's unpack that for just a minute. Let's go to the number one biggest change, because the number one biggest change is when you add something to it. So at the end of Matthew chapter 12, 21, where does Isaiah say, "And in his name shall the Gentiles trust"? Can you find that anywhere in the passage in Isaiah chapter 42? No. And please, if you can, please email that to me and show me where that is. But the biggest question here is, what is the name that the Gentiles will trust in? Because the anonymous author of Matthew, and Matthew is written anonymously, there's no name given here. But obviously, what is the what is the imposition here? What is the author of Matthew trying to make you think? In other words, we all know who the name is here, right? William, do you
Okay.
know who the name is? I mean, what's the inferred? What's the inferred, obviously,
You have to
here?
ask a question again. I'm actually editing pages, so I wasn't
Oh,
listening
sorry,
to every
sorry,
word.
sorry.
I
Okay,
apologize.
the name that is inferred, obviously, is Jesus.
On what? Well, I'm sorry. That
On
was
Well, at the end of it, in verse 21 of Matthew here,
okay. Oh yeah.
he
Okay.
says, "And in his name shall the Gentiles
Oh yeah,
trust."
yeah. Jesus. Okay.
Except we're not given a name.
Right.
We're not given a name anywhere here. So if you're reading the book of Matthew and you're a non-Hebrew, that means you're a Gentile, you don't even know what name to trust in, but the inference is very clear, and that name would be Jesus that you're going to trust in. There's no other name given here that could be the one that you would trust in. So we're just going through these, and I have not gotten. Oh, by the way, emails that I get are incredible. I just told William before we started the show that I've got to do several shows just of the emails that we're getting. There are some very intelligent people that are watching this show. Not such intelligent people doing the show, but intelligent people are watching the show. And they are
That's
giving me
funny.
whole shows with their emails, and some of the things I have never crossed my mind that they're telling me. So I want you to know that if you have read the four servant songs in the book of Isaiah, then you would know who the servant is. And you cannot add to what the prophet Isaiah said. When Mr. Solberg was on the show, he had this, and this is a very common Christian polemic, is that, well, this is further revelation, and it's further clarification. And he used the Bruce Willis movie kind of to demonstrate that.
Sixth Sense. Right.
Sixth Sense, yeah. But one thing that's very clear that we did not touch on was that no later and obviously there are first writings, Moses, and Moses wrote the Torah. We are explicitly told that in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. So obviously Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel are all later writings. They cannot change what Moses wrote. They can give further understanding and further prophecy, but they can't change what he wrote. And mine and Williams and a lot of people in Judaism's posit is that the New Testament has changed what the prophets of Israel wrote. There is no place in Isaiah where Isaiah says that the children of Israel went to Mount Carmel for their national revelation. No place. They went to Mount Sinai. If Isaiah would have written that the children of Israel went to Mount Carmel for their national revelation, the Great Assembly and the many myriads of other prophets that there are in Israel during all this time would not have allowed the book of Isaiah to be in the canon.
Right.
If he contradicted Moses.
You made a point to I believe it was Solberg and McClatchy, I believe, that the whole point is the New Testament writers, they don't just generally say, well, the Old Testament says or the Old Testament suggests. They literally say, Isaiah, this happened because of what the prophet said. I mean, so they're pushing to an idea of a specific quote, and that's where the problem is. And I don't think that they were grasping that Galachi or Solberg were actually wrapping their head around that, because it's like they were taught so much that generalized speaking is sufficient enough, but not whenever, like you said, not whenever it flat out says. It says this in the prophet Isaiah, or the prophet Jeremiah said this, or whatever. Then then you got to go back and find out what they said, not take the new guy's opinion, right? And that's the point you were trying to make over and over again, which is absolutely brilliant. It's the litmus test whenever you have to take someone's word on what TaNaCh says. You got to go back there and see what it says.
Yes, and Hashem has made it really easy for us. He allowed for some. I know that my Creator is exceedingly forgiving to me. So he gave us he didn't give us, but he allowed a King James Bible to be written, and for the non-Hebrew authors of the King James Bible to, in many places in the TaNaCh, pretty closely follow what the Hebrew Bible says. And then when they changed it in the New Testament, they left it in the Old Testament the way it kind of was before. And so I'm positive that I'm not the first one that's realized this.
Right.
What I'm really stunned by is that Christianity can survive as an adjunct religion to Judaism because of this. In other words, you can't have the newer religion attaching itself to an older religion and have them contradicting what the other one says. One thing that, like, Mormonism does, Mormonism very much contradicts the Christian scriptures in a lot of ways. And so there are no Southern Baptists that think that Mormonism is important to them. You know, Mormons are they're a cult in the view of any mainline Christian denomination.
Right.
They're a cult. Why? Because they've changed the Christian Bible. They've added stuff to it. The angel Moroni, he's nowhere found in the Christian Bible. He's an added character. And Christianity holds that Revelation closed the canon of the Christian scriptures. In other words, and where do you think they got that from? The idea of the canon being closed. Exactly. They got it from the prophets of Israel, because the prophets of Israel, or the Great Assembly, closed the canon after the book of Malachi. So the Christian priests, and they were literally called priests, still are today, they closed the canon after the book of Revelation. Then Joseph Smith comes along and opens the canon and starts adding to it. So mainline Christian denominations don't view Mormonism as it's a good thing that you can use. No, they reject Mormonism as a cult, as they reject Jehovah's Witnesses, as they reject Seventh-day Adventists, as they reject many of these splinter groups in Christianity. So, and I really want we've got to get some more Christian thinkers on the program, because it's a really good question that I want to ask them. Why do you put up with the Hebrew Bible? Because the Hebrew Bible contradicts what you teach at your church. So why do you put up with it? I mean, just make the break. And again, I've told a lot of people this. People worship lots of things. There are people that are devout followers of Buddha, that are devout followers of the Dalai Lama, that are devout followers of Muhammad. Very devout, more devout than any Christians I ever knew. So
I'd like to to answer that question as play the devil's advocate here, and I'd like to kind of answer that question for you, for the Christian.
Okay.
So there was a situation one time with my son where he kind of long time ago we had this rule: you can't have a girlfriend unless we have to make sure that this person's actually okay for you and stuff like that, right? Well, he decided not to listen. So, long story short, he fell in love with this girl, and they were dating for 6 months without me knowing about it.
Oh.
It's really, really wild, right? And I was pretty much I was kind of an over. I was a controlling dad at that time, even and I probably still am, but still, I still didn't see it. I was really good at hiding it. By the time I got to it and showed him and told him, listen, you can't date her, it was too late because he was already in love with her. Yeah. Christians, they fall in love with Jesus, and then after that, they go back to try to study to see more about him, and now they can't process that there's no way that could possibly be right. There's no way my girlfriend would ever cheat on me. There's no way the girl that I love is like that. There's no way, and they just can't accept it. There's like beyond there, it's almost to a point of incapability. For me, it took me 3 years to get bold enough to be able to walk away from the church. It took 3 years after I suspected my first problem with the church. And so, just like with my son who fell in love with this girl, it was hard. I mean, getting him to detach from that girl was like, you would think this kid was going to die from depression. And a lot of Christians go through that same exact thing, and most of them just flat out don't want to hear it. Just like a married, a girl who's in love with this guy, and this guy's bad for her. She's so in love with them, she doesn't want to hear anything else. She's like, this guy fixed my heart. Jesus fixed my heart. He healed me from smoking, whatever. He healed me from doing drugs, whatever. It's not the point. The point is that love connection that they have is the problem. That's why that's what I respect about Judaism. It's not based on emotions. It's based on principles, based on points. Emotions, if you want to have them, you can have those later. But that's not what this is about. This is about having a committed relationship, and this is the problem with Christianity. So that would be my summarized answer. I know there's more answers than that, but I see that as maybe a blanket statement that could pretty much cover most every scenario.
That's a very blanket statement, and that's a very good answer because in Christianity, it is so much emotion. I told William a while ago, I watch a lot of Christian TV now, way more than I ever used to watch when I was in the church. And you can almost, with every show, they will tug the heart. That's the main thing. Right. You watch like Rabbi Skobek and particularly Rabbi Fedro. I mean, they just get right to it. Boom, boom, boom. Like Rabbi Fedro, his eyes are always watching what he's reading, and he is absolutely on point, and that's what he's going to do. And it occurred to me the reason for this, because the rabbis don't have anything to hide. It's all there. Yeah. You can just read it for yourself. They don't have to create a savior of the world. They don't have to create a one-time sacrifice for all the sins that man ever committed. That's what Christianity has to do. They had to create this being that does not exist in the Torah. And so when you start to shine the Torah onto the New Testament, like we're doing right here, then, okay, what's the answer? There's no name that the Gentiles are going to trust in Matthew chapter 12, except Jesus. And even he doesn't say it, he implies it. But then you read Isaiah, and that's not the name that the Gentiles trust in. There is no name that the Gentiles trust in, even mentioned in the 42nd chapter of Isaiah. So they're creating a big pyramid, and as all pyramids do, it will collapse. And the pyramid of Christianity will collapse when the true Messiah comes
Yeah.
to the mountains of Israel, and that's what will happen. And don't feel like one of the saving things, and this is for educated rabbis. I'm only going to touch on it. Christians who have believed in Jesus, who have worshiped a man as God, that is idolatry, and idolatry that's probably the big one. You can be forgiven of it though, when you do it out of just not knowing, out of ignorance. You are most likely not, well, I can almost say that you're not going to spend eternity in hell.
Right.
Eternity in hell is a Christian invention, and please don't send me nasty emails about that. But it is the idea of eternity in hell comes from Dante's Inferno,
Right.
comes from all these pagan Neolithic type scenarios of thinking. Human beings are very creative. We're very creative. We create all kinds of things. We've created entire models that are based on nothing more than the human imagination. But so always try to turn away. And the reason that I say this is because in my journey out of Christianity, the hardest thing for me is my maternal grandmother. She was a wonderful woman, the most kind and generous and thoughtful woman that you can imagine. And she was a devout Christian.
Same with me. My grandmother as well.
She was a devout Christian until the day she died in a nursing home. And as I left the church and realized what was going on in the church, immediately thoughts like that came to my head. And in my very early moving out of the church, my grandmother would be spending eternity in hell. And that was probably one of the hardest things. I'm like a macho guy, and I'm almost crying right now.
Right.
Because that was a consuming thing for me for months, and then even to a lesser extent, my maternal grandfather, who also went to church with my grandma every Sunday and was also just a wonderful man. And then my paternal grandparents, they never went to church. And I remembered thinking, well, they would be in better position than my very devout grandma and grandpa on my mother's side. So don't let those kinds of things be an impediment to you, because you're responsible for yourself. If you hear my voice right now, you're responsible for yourself.
Yeah.
And the fact that you have giants in your past that were giants in the church, that's irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. Those people will have to deal with their own situation before Hashem. And Hashem is a very merciful God. And again, this is like probably Rabbi 6.0 on the scale, and I'm not going to touch on punishments and stuff like that. But rest assured that I can tell you with absolute certainty that a person who was a very good person during their life and helped people and was kind and generous does not spend eternity in hell with fire and cutting and weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Right.
There is punishment. definitely. There
You
is
you would
punishment
almost
for
look
that
at it.
person.
I would look at it more as a purification. It's kind
Correct.
of like the difference between discipline and punishment.
That's
Discipline
a great
is
point.
they both
Yes.
can feel negative, but one of them has a purpose of making you a better person, and the other one has the
Yes.
purpose of torturing you or beating you because you did something bad. And so,
Correct.
with gold, for example, you know how they purify gold is with fire, and they
Yeah.
leave it. The longer they leave it on, the more pure the gold is, and when they know to pull it
Correct.
off is when there's no more dross can be taken from it, then it's at its purest form. And so
Yeah.
with us, it's the same way. So when that purification time comes, you know, however much impurities I have adopted over my lifespan, it may take me
Right.
longer to be purified than others. You know,
Yeah.
I think the general rule is if they put a time frame on it, it's 11 months is the most anybody will spend in that
Yes.
place, whatever you want to view it as, that place away from
Correct.
God. 11 months max. You know, the
Yeah.
people who won't ever leave that place are like people who totally defy God, which is like Hitler. And you know, and
Yeah.
cannibals, and you know,
Yeah.
all these people who are just really wicked, downright evil people. Those will be eternally separated from Hashem. But those are the
Right.
only ones. So your grandmother,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah. So
my grandmother,
so
my dad, all these people who love
yeah.
God and good soul
Yeah.
people, they'll be there.
Yes.
They'll be surprised.
Yeah.
They'll be surprised that we're there, but they'll eventually get there.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So it's such a reversal of thinking when you leave the church, you
Yeah.
know, because in the church you're in the lifeboat. And there's even songs about the lifeboat, you know, and everybody who is outside of the lifeboat is going to an eternity of damnation. I remember one time in my childhood, my dad still is a carpenter, and he would hire a certain teacher during the summer that was a high school friend of his, and this man was a very devout Christian. And I remember him saying one time how many good people there would be in hell. And I mean, at the time,
Oh yeah, I've heard
I
that too.
accepted that,
Yeah.
you know. And the reason they would be in hell is because they didn't believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
They were good people. They helped other people. They did kind acts, but they didn't have Jesus, so they go to an eternity in hell. And one thing that does is it makes God into this very vengeful
Vicious
person.
Yeah.
And then people who are outside the church look at that and they don't want to have anything to do with it because they're not going to participate in that.
Yeah.
So,
And guess what? It's totally the opposite.
It's
The New
totally
Testament,
the opposite.
The New Testament says you will burn for an eternity in hell if you don't bow the knee to Jesus. But God doesn't say that. That's
doesn't
Jesus
say
who said that.
Hashem-
So
yeah,
who is
Hashem
the more
makes no mention of that whatsoever.
Right.
Of you, like the really good rabbis. And by the way, for the channel, when I say good rabbis, I mean Pharisees, and that is
True.
another opposite there. You know what
those
I mean?
terms
Because
should
in
be
the
used
church,
interchangeably? Right.
Yeah, the Pharisees are the bad guys in the church. Well, no, I'll take that back, because in chapter 23 of Matthew, Jesus specifically tells you
Do exactly
listen
what
to the
they teach.
Pharisees.
Yeah,
listen to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do what they say.
Tell you to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's another complete reversal there in what the church teaches and what the New Testament says. But when I say good rabbis, I mean Pharisees, and Pharisees are the rabbis who are connected with a synagogue. They keep the Torah, and in the church you can't keep the Torah, but there's people that do. But the rabbis on William's channel here, they keep the Torah. They do. I remember last year at Dallas, there was something that rabbis, and I should have asked you, or I should have asked Shannon, but I didn't. There was something that Rabbi Singer couldn't do because he hadn't done his purification. Do you remember that?
I don't remember what that was.
He
Actually.
couldn't. Shannon asked him if he could do something, and he said, "Well, I haven't done my purification."
Right.
And in the church, that you would be roundly laughed at
Yeah.
because you're just a throwback to that Old Testament, old law stuff, and you're just hanging on. You don't have Jesus in your heart. Well, no. The Torah is eternal. It's forever. We have clearly established that on this show, and we'll establish that sometime with some Christian apologists
Right.
that want to come on, because the Torah doesn't cease to exist as the Apostle Paul says it does. It's very clear that it's an eternal thing.
Now, Paul speaks out of both sides of his mouth, though, because in
Yes.
Romans, it's weird, because in Romans, he actually goes out and says, for not the hearers of the law are justified, but the doers of the. I'm like, will you make up your mind already?
Make up your mind. And those are the little clues that they use to determine the authorship of those letters.
So who would you say wrote Hebrews? Would that be Paul?
No, Hebrews is actually anonymous.
Okay,
and even in the church, it is recognized as being anonymous.
Interesting.
So interesting here.
Well, let me pull this point up, because the reason why I brought up Hebrews, though, is because I want to read something to you also that would line up with things that Christianity has no belief in at all. But Hebrews itself specifically tells you something that's kind of like a little disturbing, really, if you want to look at it this way. So Hebrews 10:26. Right here says, "For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remains no more sacrifice for your sins." You tell that to a Christian pastor, and he'll kick you out of his church.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and how does that? In other words, I would say Hebrews is the okay. Let's do this right now. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 4. It would be verse. It's towards the end of the chapter. It would be Hebrews chapter 4, verse 20. Let's just do that right now, because we have no.
There's 4 goes to 16.
No pattern
so
to this. What's that?
4 goes to 16. It looks like.
Okay, so it's towards the end of the 4th chapter.
Seeing that we have a high priest that is passed into heaven.
Verse 15.
Oh, 15. Okay.
Verse 15. Verse 15.
Okay.
Okay, this is the great part of having no itinerary for the show.
we could change the title later.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, this is very clear. For we do not have a high priest unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tried in all respects as we are, apart from sin. And the King James says it more commonly for the Christian, had no sin.
Yeah, it says,
the high priest is Jesus.
Right. So it says, King James says, for we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but as in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin.
Yet without sin. Right. Okay, now go to the very next book in the Christian canon, and that's the book of James.
Okay.
Or it's actually the book of Jacob.
Right. What chapter do you want?
We're going to chapter 1.
Okay. The whole letter to James is like
the whole letter contradicts Paul. But anyway,
I've never heard any teachings in all my life of being a Christian. I've been a Christian for a long time before I came out. I have never heard anybody teach on the letter of James at all.
No,
it's like they won't even touch it. It's weird.
Because you can't. The only thing James is on the Arminian side of justified or faith justified by works. That's it. That's the only thing you'll get out of church. And here's the reason you're not going to hear anything preached out of the book of James, because maybe somebody sitting in the church just read the 4th chapter of Hebrews, and then in the 12th verse
of chapter 1.
Blessed is the man who does endure trial, for when he has been proved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Master has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is enticed, and you can read it out of the King Jimmy after this, I am enticed by Elohim, for Elohim is not enticed by evil matters, and he entices no one. Now read that out of King Jimmy.
All right, verse 12.
Do just 13, I guess is okay.
Okay, so let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither can tempteth he any man.
Wait a minute. What did we just learn in the 4th chapter of Hebrews? We just learned that we have a high priest, Jesus, who has been tempted in all ways, as are we, but is without sin. And you are taught in the church and by every Christian apologist that Jesus is God. He is equal with God. He is the part of the triune Godhead. So how, again, no rabbis involved here, how can Jesus be our great high priest who was tempted in every way that we were? And by the way, that is a linchpin of Christian theology, because we had to have somebody who could live the Torah without breaking any of the Torah in order to be the perfect sacrifice, because the blood of goats could never wash away our sins in the church.
Right.
So then we go to the James 1st chapter, and we realize that God, who we are told all the time by the church, is Jesus, and Jesus cannot be tempted by evil. So if Jesus, let's give this to the church. Let's give this to the apologist. Jesus is God. Okay? I'm abandoning everything I've taught you up to this point, and I'm saying Jesus is God. Well, then, how is Jesus able to be a pure sacrifice if he could never sin? Because the whole point of Christian theology is that Jesus took on humanity, and he showed us the way. He showed us how to live a life that was pleasing to God. And he was a man, but not just any man. He was the man. And so he lived the life that you and I could not. But he was tempted just like we are, because if you cannot fail, and this goes back to the rabbi's point of, if you could never be tempted to sin, did you lead a righteous life? And the answer to that is no.
Right.
And so if Jesus
a robot can't be righteous. A robot can't be righteous. You have to be able to choose.
Can't be righteous.
And you have to be you have to right.
Yeah. So the same thing applies to Jesus. If Jesus cannot sin, if he can't even be tempted to sin, then what is the point of his existence? That's a great question. And again, we're not coming at you from the Hebrew Bible. This is in the Christian canon where we are explicitly told this. And this, I would say, this is hard to be misinterpreted. How do you misinterpret either one of these passages? They're very clear.
You can't. You really just have to ignore one of the two.
You have to ignore one of the two. And the one that gets ignored is James, because in the church, if you went into the church tomorrow and you said, oh, I really love Jesus, and he's my high priest, and he was tempted just like me, but without sin.
Yet God said he can't be tempted.
And God says he can't be tempted. So if you can't be tempted as a human being, if you can't be tempted and you can't sin, i.e. our scenario of being plopped down right before your age of accountability on a desert island with nothing to steal, with nothing to lie, with nothing to lust, with nothing at all, just you get fed. And if you could never, ever sin, then you didn't lead a righteous life. And that would be
And
the
again,
case for Jesus.
Again, we're making a point here to that's really focusing in on one specific target. I mean,
Right.
like there are things like even the New Testament says that Elizabeth and was it Elizabeth and
Zacharias and
yeah,
Elizabeth, they committed no sin
right. So
and kept all the statutes, the ordinances, and were perfect.
so we're not
Luke
saying that
chapter 1,
they're
verse 5.
yes, we're not saying they're not righteous. So I guess to reshape what it's saying is if I could never be tempted with eating a telephone pole. That does not tempt me at all.
Correct.
Okay, now
Yeah.
or even grass. That would not
Yeah.
be a temptation I would have to overcome. So
Right.
I would never do
'Cause
that anyway.
If you were
Right.
tempted to eat grass, I'd have to call you Nebuchadnezzar.
So maybe saying you couldn't be righteous may not be the right term, but that's the point.
Could
That's the
not be
point you're
perfect.
trying to make. Is
You
the
can't, you can't be. Remember, in Christian theology, and there is not a single Christian apologist that will challenge me on this. The sacrifice for sin had to be perfect.
right.
Jesus is that perfect sacrifice. That's the case. And they take that from the Hebrew Bible because at Passover, your sheep has to be a year old and it has to be without spot or blemish. Now, it's not the same sense, but it's what Christians took from it. In other words, a 1-year-old sheep or sheeps.
Now I'm glad we're
as
talking about
Paul
this
would say.
because we're in the Passover narratives now. So this is not the narrative,
Yeah.
but Passover context. So
Correct. Yes. Context.
your
yeah.
point
So,
that you just made was one of the things about Passover that really triggered me. Like, whoa, that's just weird, because they were supposed to they inspected this sheep or this goat for lamb for 3 days to make sure there was no problems with it at all, so that by the time they handed it to the high priest, and they slaughtered it at the moment that knife was made contact, there was no blemish on this sheep at all. There was no blemish on the lamb, right? But Jesus was beaten like beyond recognition before he died.
correct.
So he
yeah.
would have been disqualified if you were taking your lamb to the market. Let's say today, and he was on the trailer, and he fell off your trailer and tumbled across the road. You could not go back and get that lamb and take him to get slaughtered, because they would not accept it. That's not how it works. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yep, you're welcome. And yes, the Passover.
I knew we'd get there.
we have
12 minutes is what we have.
We have 12 minutes. Okay, I can do it in 12.
Do
I
it.
can
Do
in
it.
12.
I will not interrupt you unless it's an emergency.
Feel free to interrupt.
Okay.
One thing that people say that send me emails, they love the banter between us, and
I love it too. Hey, that's one of my favorite parts about Rabbi Federer's show. We go back and forth. It's so cool.
Yeah. So we have the, and I'll go with this real quickly. We have the synoptic gospels, and those are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And don't be impressed. Synoptic simply means as seen through one eye. Okay, they are the same. All right. On the Hebrew calendar, the first month of the Hebrew calendar is the month of Nisan, or I believe the Hebrew is Aviv. When the children of Israel left Egypt, they left in the month of the Aviv barley, which that just means it was the mature barley. But even rabbis today use Nisan. So we use Nisan because that's easy to do. So remember that in Hebrew thought, the day ends at sundown and the next day begins. So you get, let's call it 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. just for our time. So as the day goes to 6 p.m. at 6:01, it's the next day. All right, that keeps it simple for us. So Passover is The eve of Passover is the 14th day of Nisan. The Passover lamb, remember, it has to be slaughtered before that 6 p.m. All right, because you can't do butchering on the Passover, on the actual day of the Passover. You can't do butchering. So we're coming around. It's 3 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. It's 5:30. We've slaughtered our lamb. And now we're going to eat what is commonly known as the Passover Seder.
The meal.
Or
yeah.
in Christianity, it's known as the Last Supper. You know the Last Supper. Okay? So the 15th of Nisan at 6 p.m. is when it starts. All right? So they are eating the Passover Seder, or they're having the Last Supper. All right? It's the 15th of Nisan. This is known as it's also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread basically encompasses that whole week of the Passover. The Passover is like the first day of it, and then the week is the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
It's 8 days.
And it has in there the Feast of First Fruits also. So you'll see that. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke record clearly that the disciples are gathered together in the upper room. You can read these accounts for yourself for brevity. And they have their Passover Seder, or their Last Supper. Remember, Jesus breaks the bread. He gives it to the disciples. He pours the cups and gives it to the disciples. They have eaten their lamb, and they're well into the night now. And after this Last Supper, that's when we get the Roman soldiers coming, and we get all the shenanigans that surround after they've eaten the Passover Seder. All right, very clear. All three Gospels are in these regard pretty much the same concerning the Last Supper of Jesus and the disciples. Remember when I said last week, and I didn't get any bad emails about it. I thought I might. I said that in the account in Mark in the garden. Oh, Rabbi Tovia Singer has confirmed that the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives are synonymous.
Okay.
Yeah, and he said that there are several gardens of Gethsemane in the Mount of Olives area.
Gotcha.
So that
would make sense.
I got different emails concerning that. I got emails that said they are not the same thing, and I got emails that said they were. But Rabbi Singer is a pretty good source on this, so I'm gonna go with there's no contradiction.
He does live there, so it'd be pretty easy for him to confirm that.
He does live there, so he could probably just walk out and check. You know, well, let me see. He did. Hey, Greg, I'll get back to you on that.
Hey, quick comment real fast, too, while we're still on that you were talking about the Passover, when the Passover meal would have been consumed, right? There's a lot of you on the Messianic view of the New Testament that wasn't a Passover meal. It was actually the fast of the firstborn, that they were breaking the fast of the firstborn. And for the Christian world out there, if you've never heard of what that whole thing was about, well, Passover itself, who did it in the TaNaCh, in the Hebrew Scriptures, or what you would call the Old Testament? Who did it affect? It only affected the firstborn son of every household, the firstborn in the household. Which means that if Easter is supposed to be like Passover, then the death of Jesus, being the death of the Lamb, if you want to call it that, the Lamb of God, which is actually the pagan God Lamb. Look at that too. Then that would have only saved if you are a firstborn son in your household.
Be a firstborn, correct.
Your sister, your younger brothers, they would have no hope in Jesus.
Correct. Yes.
There's tons of issues
only
here.
apply to that.
That's right.
It can only apply to firstborn.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so now let's go and remember. Okay, so I said Jesus was kind of like very timid, and he was kind of wussy in the Mark. And by the time we get to John, Jesus is a stud. And I had forgotten even how that theme is carried out. Let me ask you this, William. Who carried Jesus' cross?
Let's see. That was not the centurion. What was it? Who was it? I
You're
forgot.
close. It was a. You had it.
I was
You
close.
had it right on. You had it on the. See, your brain went to it, but then something interdicted.
I haven't. Look, it's been 8 years since I've read through the New Testament, so I don't remember.
Okay. In Matthew, in Mark, in Luke, Simon of Cyrene.
Okay, there we go.
Is the one who carries.
Nice.
It's funny you went to the S right away. He carries Jesus' cross. Matthew confirms. Mark confirms. Luke confirms. See Mark chapter 12, I believe. Or Mark 15. Matthew 27 and Luke 23 or 24. But you will read in your Christian Bible that Simon of Cyrene carried the cross.
Okay.
Now, just go real quickly if you've got your Bible with you, or if you're going to pause the show.
Go ahead.
Go to the 19th chapter of John, the highest Christology, and verse 17 or verse 16. Then delivered he them, therefore, unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went forth into the place called the place of the skull. In Hebrew, it's called Golgotha.
Okay.
Remember in John, I said Jesus a stud?
Yeah.
He's a real stud. He don't need nobody to carry his cross in the book of John.
Now, in the other Gospels, I was painted the picture, maybe because of movies we've seen, that Jesus started carrying it, but then he failed. So then Simon came up.
That is complete creation.
Good to know.
Out of it. Oh, well, let's tell you what. This is important.
It is
it
important,
really
actually.
Is.
Yeah.
It's very important
Because this is clearly a contradiction.
The 27th chapter, and we'll go to 30.
What book or what letter are you in?
Matthew chapter 27.
Okay. 27:32. Got it. Here we go.
And after they, or 31, after they had mocked him, they took the robe off him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify himself. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross.
Yep.
That's Matthew's account.
So that's where I got the centurion from. It was Cyrene, not centurion.
Cyrene, yes, correct.
Okay.
You had it.
All right.
And Mark says, and when they had mocked him, they took off the purple from him and put his own clothes on him and led him out to crucify himself. And they compel one Simon, a Cyrene, who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. And if for the Christian that's never heard of Alexander and Rufus, this is the only place you hear of Alexander and Rufus. But Alexander and Rufus have been made into a thing by some Christian apologists. 23 of Luke. I know it's 23. 23 and 25. And he released unto them that for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had desired. But he delivered Jesus to their will. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country. And on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus.
There you go. You do have a really good memory, by the way. I'm proud of you.
I do have pretty good memory.
You do.
I know. I get it from Rabbi Singer. He bequeathed it to me. Probably not. But what William said, never underestimate the power of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because they create this thing. There's nothing here that says that Jesus started to carry his cross and then he couldn't. and then Simon the Cyrenian had to pick it up. But in the 19th chapter of John, we clearly see, and he, bearing his cross, went forth. And how far did he make it? He made it the whole way. There's no time when he didn't. Now, a apologist could say, well, it doesn't say he went the whole way. Okay. And he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the skull, which is in Hebrew Golgotha. Okay, so where was Jesus crucified in the Christian Bible? Golgotha.
Right.
Where did Jesus carry his cross to? Golgotha. Okay, so how do you? In other words, these are points in the Christian Bible that you can't remember how we solved the God tempted David, or David was tempted by God, and then David was tempted by Satan. That was classic last week too, when you said, once you know who Satan works for,
yeah,
then you can understand. Because in the church, Satan doesn't work for God. Satan opposes God. But in TaNaCh, literally, Satan works for God. You know, I don't know what kind of contract he's got, because his contract kind of ends at some point.
That's funny.
You know what? This just dawned on my head. This is a great question for rabbis. So I remember a show a long time ago, and I think it was Rabbi Skobek, and he said, well, they'll in the age to come, after the end of days, and in the world to come, they don't need Satan anymore.
Right.
And what happens to him? Does he just disappear? I was wondering, perhaps Satan Satan's not an evil angel.
No.
He can just be an angel.
He just
doesn't.
He might
doesn't have to go do the evil inclination.
He'll probably be reassigned.
He gets reassigned. Yeah, he gets his.
That would be logical.
I wonder if he gets a gold watch.
That would be more. Oh, that's funny.
God can just pick up some paving material and.
All right. Well, let's see let's see how we can put a bow tie on this thing.
Okay, we're gonna tie this in now. Okay, here's the big problem now when we get to the book of John, 13th chapter. Verse 1, now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of the world unto the Father, having loved his own which were of the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil, having now put into heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God, went to God. He riseth from supper, and laid aside his garment, and took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet. That's chapter 13 of John. After supper. In all three of the synoptics, it literally says the Passover. They ate the Passover. Not so in John. In the Christian world, nobody knows what the preparation day is. And we'll go to I believe it's in the 18th chapter of John here, that it's the preparation day. It's not the 14th day of Nisan. It's the 13th day of Nisan in the book of John. You can read this for yourself, and you will see that that's the case. In the 22nd or 27th verse of the same chapter, Judas leaves the party to go purchase the items for the Passover, or to give some money to the poor. My question, why would Judas be leaving the Last Supper to go purchase food for the Last Supper? That can't be.
That's a funny question.
Here's the fix. Here's the fix from the apologists. The big problem in John is when we get to the Praetorium. I'm not going to read it all for you, but please read it for yourself. Christian or Jewish person who is thinking about going to church, if read 10 chapters, your soul is worth it. When in John, the rabbis cannot enter into the praetorium because they have to remain clean to eat the Passover Seder. They can't go into the house of a Gentile and then eat the Passover because they have to be ritualistically clean to eat the Passover. They didn't have this problem in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Apologists come to the rescue of the Gospel of John. What the rabbis couldn't eat, what they had to remain ritually pure for, was the Hagigah. I confess to the entire audience that I did not know what the Hagigah was. Rabbi Federo informed me as to what the Hagigah is. So the apologists come up with this maybe 16th day of Nisan meal that the Pharisees had to be pure for. Again, they're taking this out of Numbers, and it's obscure. It's not, there's no rabbis that teach this. But here's the big question for the apologists who have created the Hagigah of Nisan 16.
Meaning that it's like the concordance, if you want to call it that. their own version of the Hagigah.
They created this reason why, because John, the rabbis, now Jesus is getting ready to be crucified, and the rabbis haven't had the Passover Seder yet. How could they not have the Passover Seder? Because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they've eaten the Passover, and then the soldiers come after the Passover. And then they take Jesus to Pilate.
I know, that's something I never. It's wild. I never caught that in all my time. This is the first time I've actually heard this new problem. That never registered. That's a really great point.
This isn't just a little problem.
No, it's massive. That's massive. There's so many problems. I start losing track with all the problems. This is one I haven't heard. That's really good.
You can get overwhelmed by the problems.
Right.
So now
stuff.
We've got to create, because for John to be John, in other words, John changes the day that Jesus gets crucified. Because John is the only book of the New Testament that refers to Jesus as the Lamb of God. The only one. You do not hear this in any of the other synoptics. Jesus is the Lamb. He's not going to eat the Passover. Remember, John is written maybe 95 to 100. Most of the Jews that were caught up in the euphoria of the early Jesus movement have left. They're not there. Now we've got mostly Greeks and non-Hebrews in this new church. So Jesus is not eating the Passover lamb as in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus is the Passover lamb in the book of John. But the question for apologists is, if the only thing the rabbis have got to be pure for, or ritualistically clean for, is to eat this later Hagigah, then how could they go into the praetorium in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Because they would still have to be eating that same Hagigah that the apologists have absolutely created to try to make John mesh with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I posed that question to a rather prominent Christian apologist, and guess what the answer was? No contact. no answer. Well, it's a valid question you're positing. And by the way, Hagigah and I didn't know that. I'll close on this real quickly, but read this for yourself, because this is a huge. If you can't even be sure of the day that the Savior of the world went to the crucifixion, what else can you be sure of concerning the crucifixion? But a Hagigah is meant to be eaten sometimes before the Passover, because you're supposed to eat the Passover Seder at your leisure. You're not supposed to be like ravenously hungry where you just like, tear into it.
You're supposed to be reclined and relaxed.
You're supposed to be reclined and relaxed.
Yep, exactly.
You've probably already eaten a meal before the Passover. And now the Passover, the Passover is not so much about the meal. It's about, number one, just keeping the word of Hashem, being diligent to his word, and having that community time. And the Passover is probably, I'm not a rabbi or Jewish, but I think the Passover is probably one of the main threads that ties the Jewish community together.
Right.
It's a big one. All the feast days do, but the Passover, it's the first one in the spring.
Right.
It's a big one, and they all are united in this. They all eat the same things, and the entire community all over the world. Jewish people are keeping a Passover Seder and doing in Melbourne, Australia. They're doing the same thing as they are in Jerusalem, Israel.
Yeah.
And so, anyway,
That's
didn't
good.
say it this time.
You're good. So in conclusion, so as you go back and look up this Haggadah is a tractate in the Talmud, and there's lots of tractates in the Talmud. It's just like it's one area,
tons, yeah.
but it's specifically in that tractate Haggadah. It actually covers the Moed or the Moedim, the holy days, and that's where all this stuff is found. So if you want to know more about it, I don't recommend you going to look for it. I recommend you calling a rabbi who knows about it and asking him because they've studied
rabbi.
it. You don't study the Talmud.
They are abundantly nice.
Yes, and you don't study.
They will endeavor to answer your questions to the very best of their God-given ability. So,
and you don't ever study the Talmud by yourself.
No.
You just don't do. You don't do that. It
No.
would be like somebody getting out of high school and going to I guess you could say get a book on how to do brain surgery, and for them to read and study that book themselves and think that they could go in and perform it.
Now
There is
one person in history that I know of that did do that.
Now,
and that's
Doogie Howser,
Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hillbillies only graduated from the 6th grade, and he did brain surgery.
I thought you were going to say something like Doogie Howser.
Oh, he's another one.
That was a good one. Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. It's been a good one, guys. Email is finally after 9. How many episodes do we have? 8 or 9? I don't know.
I don't know.
I finally have William at TaNaCh Talk, my email address on there. Yay! And then and so if you have anything regarding the channel, you're going to send it to William at TaNaCh.com. If you have anything regarding this particular show, you're going to send it to Greg McBride's GC McBride 63 at gmail.com. So any regarding topics of this particular show, that's where you go. So, Greg, awesome as usual, man. I had a great time. I always enjoy our show and our bantering together.
Thank you, sir.
You betcha. Y'all should have a great week, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. Hashem willing.
Yep.
Peace out, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hello, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com. TANACHTALK.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב